Okay, we're rolling.
This is an interview at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, Buffalo, New York, 24th of October 2006, approximately 2:40 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Ralph Burroughs, Sirianni, January 2nd, 49, Buffalo.
Okay, what was your educational background prior to entering service?
High school education,
Where'd you go to high school?
Kenmore West.
Kenmore? My wife went to East. Okay, did you have any employment prior to going into service?
Yes, I did. At the time I was a senior, I had the opportunity to work part-time. So I was a short order cook at Kiss's Restaurant on Day Street, Days Park in Allentown.
Yeah.
So I worked there for a while, and then I worked at Morrison Steel. And that was the job I had right before going into the Marine Corps.
All right. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
Why did you enlist?
Well, I had a few problems at the time with, with some, we were in a fraternity, and back then that was kind of just a roving gang, and we would party a lot, and sometimes wind up getting into trouble, which usually wound up being a fight, things like that, with other fraternities, and a few too many of those. And so I was given, after a few problems with the law, the judge said, well, you have to go into service or you're going away for a while. So I had always wanted to join the Marine Corps, but this was kind of a little stimulant here. It got me going a little quicker than I thought.
Why did you want to go in the Marines?
I think one of the guys in our fraternity, his father, now I remember, Mr. Ritzenthaler, he was a World War II veteran, and he was involved in a lot of campaigns in the Pacific. He was a Marine. Mm-hmm. And we used to go there, and we were fascinated with this guy. We'd sit with him for hours, and he would show us photos and, all the island hopping that the Marines were doing and what he was involved in. And as I look back on it, he was probably, the biggest influence as far as becoming a Marine. I'm sure there were other influences as well, but I know we spent quite a bit of time with him.
Okay. Where did you go for your basic?
Paris Island.
What was it like?
It was everything that they said it would be, and then some. It was quite an experience. I had gone in there after being sent away for a while as a youth. I was, downstate for a couple of years, and so I had a little experience being away from home and being around some pretty radical people. But nothing prepared me for those drill instructors. They were breed unto their own, and we did a lot of working out there, but I had worked out quite a bit before going in the Marine Corps. I started getting into that when I was away, so it was almost like I stepped, into the next level of whatever I was into at that time. This was the next step, and it seemed to be that I was handling fairly well whatever they put out there. I was already into running. I was doing a lot of boxing at that time and weightlifting. So the physical end of it wasn't bad. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
Okay. How long was your basic?
I seem to remember it was either in Paris Island or the staging end of it, which took place at Camp Lejeune, that they shaved off a couple weeks because Tet had taken place somewhere around then. and they wanted to hurry up and get us over to Nam. But basic training, I can't remember how long that lasted. Probably not much different than the Army's, I don't know.
8 weeks usually.
Something like that.
Did you go to an AIT or advanced
That was
training?
afterwards, yeah. Yeah, I think that was the one they may have cut off some time on.
Okay.
In retrospect, looking at your training, do you think it prepared you for what you met in Vietnam?
Absolutely, definitely. I think that that some of those drill instructors, I think they all tried to, to prepare us for what was coming, especially if we had 0311 MOSs, if we were in the infantry, which I was. A lot of those guys did 2, 3 tours, and as crazy as they were, and they were probably the craziest bunch of people I ever ran across, I think the bottom line was they were really trying to prepare us for what we were going to come into there. They did a good job of it.
Okay. Were you assigned to a unit before you went over, or when you got into Vietnam?
When I got to Vietnam.
Okay. When did you go over?
In June of '69,
Flew over?
yes.
What was it like as soon as you got off the plane? Where did you land?
We landed in Da Nang, and I remember, the first thing I remember was the heat. And the door opened, it was just so hot. But I remember seeing the crew doing the walk around, they were checking the plane for bullet holes. As the planes were coming in, they were oftentimes shot at. So I thought, okay, here we go.
What unit were you assigned to?
I was in the 7th Marines, I was in the 1st Marine Division, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines.
Where did they send you from Da Nang?
We stopped at a couple of places. We spent the first 2, maybe 3 nights in Da Nang, and then we wound up at Hill 55. And I think from there we went to Hill 10, and I was still in my stateside utilities. I didn't have a weapon assigned to me yet. I had starched, utilities, fatigues on, and I remember the base got hit and overran. And here I was without any weapon, and, that was like the 4th or 5th night in Vietnam. We had sappers right inside the wire. And you could see them running around, and I felt totally helpless because I didn't even have a cable,
Okay. What kind of weapon were you issued?
16.
Did you train on the 16 or the 14?
No, 14.
Did you find a difference between the two? Was it preference? Or?
I heard a lot of bad things about the 16. Mine only jammed on me once, and I know how that happened because I tripped. It was late, and we were going through a blue line. It was probably about a knee-deep, whatever stream, and I had lost my balance, and I had my rifle like this, and I went forward with it, and everything got in the barrel. So we got set up. We were digging in. And I didn't have time to clean my rifle yet, which we could do blindfolded, and we got hit. So that was the first and only time my 16 ever jammed on me. I thought it was a pretty good weapon.
Were you able to clear it at that time?
Yeah.
How would you describe daily life?
It was day-to-day fear for me. Whenever anyone asked me about Vietnam, I could sum it up in one word: fear. I just never had a day without being afraid there. There was always a thing of being afraid of you know, ambushes, booby traps, whatever. It was just, it seemed like the whole place was against you. The elements, the monsoon at a certain time, the heat, just going through the terrain. All of that stuff without the enemy was tough to deal with in itself.
Did you spend most of your time outside the wire?
Yes. Yeah. We came in about every 2.5, 3 months. We'd come in for about a three-day stand on, whatever.
Mhm.
And we'd get some hot chow, get some dry clothes, showers, and, you know, hang out a little bit, rest, and then we'd be right back out again.
Mhm.
Were you ever wounded or have any injuries?
No. I had some illnesses there. I had malaria twice. I had that jungle rot and worms and all kinds of stuff.
Did your unit suffer a lot of casualties?
Yes.
You described before one time when a medevac, Army medevac helicopter came in and helped you out, and also a time you couldn't rely on the Marical division. Could you talk about those, mention those on camera?
We were on a summer offensive toward the end of August of '69 in Hepduck Valley in the Quaison area, Quaison Mountains. And we were supposed to have an Americal unit as a blocking force. And we ran into a large, I don't know if it was 2 regiments, whatever it was, of NVA. And the American unit decided that they weren't going to fight anymore. Somehow they were out of the picture, and we wound up catching the full brunt of this attack. And that was probably the worst time in Vietnam for me, was that particular offensive.
Why? Just because of that incident, or?
There was a lot of contact at that
Mhm.
time. I had always heard in boot camp about VC. They always talked to us about the black pajama clad, enemy that we were going to be running across that, survives on a handful of rice and all that. And while the NVA, I'm sure, could survive on a handful of rice, they were the ones that we always ran across. We saw NVA all the time, and they were to be respected. I learned that early on in my tour that I was going to respect these guys because they were very good fighters. And I remember early capturing. We captured a couple of them, and just looking in the eyes of one, and the defiance there. I mean, he was caught, he was bound, and he just glared back at me, and I knew, that these guys would be respected. And that was early in my tour.
What was your opinion of their weaponry, like the AK-47?
Yeah, superior weapon.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did you ever use one yourself?
I fired one. I
Mhm.
didn't carry one, no.
Mhm.
How about the South Vietnamese Army? Did you ever have any?
Yeah. We had,
What did you think of them as a fighting units?
There may have been, and I'm sure there were some units that were supportive, that were to be relied on. I would have liked it worked, more with units like that. I think probably, at this time in the war, in '69, '70, maybe they started losing their, steam a little bit too. So, I don't know, I didn't see them as being real gung-ho.
How would you rate your officers?
most of them were to be respected. You know, there were some instances where I had a problem with their judgment, their call. But for the most part, they were well trained, and I think they had our safety in mind. I think there were situations that they were placed in where they may have had to make a bad call, and as a result of it, I'm sure they're tormented by it today.
Did you have many minorities in your unit?
Oh yeah.
Everybody get along all right?
Out in the bush, everyone got along.
Mm-hmm.
In the rear, there was a lot of trouble. Matter of fact, there were times we came to the rear where, you know, we just thought, geez, we'd be better off out there. I remember times, you know, there were stabbings, fraggings, you know, things like that going on in the rear, and I thought, geez, let me get the hell out of here, you know?
Were there drug issues at all in your unit?
We didn't have that problem out in the bush. You know, what was going on in the rear was, you know, a whole different story. But out in the bush, and that's the thing with Vietnam veterans that really bothers me. Everybody just assumes that you were a doper if you were a Vietnam vet. And, you know, they see Platoon and movies like that where these guys are getting high. I didn't see that out in the bush. There was no time for that. There was no way that you would allow him for the guy next to you to be high. But again, when we came to the rear, you know, this group went over here and drank, this one went and smoked weed, and, you know, whatever.
Was there any incident that you maybe thought was somewhat amusing or something that was inspirational to you while you were there?
Amusing. One time, this native buddy of mine, we're still in touch, Sammy Billy, lives out in Oklahoma. He's been over the house. We got our hands on a South Vietnamese guy's scooter, and we took it into the Ville. We were on base for a couple of days, and we were going to go into the Ville, and we stopped on the way there to stash something. I forgot what it was. We put it out in this field and by a rock. So on our way back, we pull over, and I start heading out there. Well, about the same distance from the road to the rock is a water buffalo. And he's sitting out there, and I get out there close to this good-sized rock. Excuse me. And I'm thinking, okay, this thing seems pretty, you know, content out there.
Drink water.
Yeah. And so I start heading toward the rock, and I get close to it, and this thing started snorting, and it came at me. So I run and jump up on top of this thing, which is probably more like a boulder, and I'm on top of it, and this thing is going crazy, snorting and kicking and everything, and I was scared as hell. And this little kid comes up with this stick, this little Vietnamese kid, and he whacks this water buffalo on the behind, and you know, says something in Vietnamese, and the thing takes off. I'm thinking, wow, you know, here I am up on this rock, you know, and I'm supposed to be, you know, like this badass dude, whatever, and you know, and this kid's laughing, you know. I look back on that, that was pretty humorous, you know. Now it is, at the time I was scared as hell.
Was there any person or persons that you thought you remember best from when you were in the service?
I had a best friend there. He was from a unit up north, and they were leaving Vietnam, so the guys that had more time had come down to us. His name was Alfredo Ruiz. He was from Camden, New Jersey, and he became my best friend there. And he just died about 3 years ago. But I tried to get him to see him after Vietnam. It was a long time before I hooked up with him. You know, when you leave those guys, I just remember my last couple weeks in Vietnam, I had a relapse in malaria, and they put me on a hospital ship. And I was so delirious, and I had to beg this Navy doctor to let me meet my rotation date, because I had a bad feeling if I didn't meet that something might happen. So he let me go. I came back to my unit, and I remember leaving on the chopper and just seeing a few of the guys down there, and never really thinking that I might not see them again. I don't know, maybe it was the malaria, or just being young and just assuming, you know, we'd all meet again. But after I got back, years later, I often wondered, you know, if I'd ever see them, and how much I wanted to. And I started checking publications, VFW, and different military publications to see if there was any type of 7th Marine or 2-7 reunion going on. And after years of this, and getting a hold of a few people, I decided to have the first reunion here in Buffalo. So it was in '94, I believe it was, '95. We had our very first company reunion, hotel company, and it was here in Buffalo. About 40 guys showed up. I couldn't get Alfredo here. I think he was having some problems at the time, and we came close to hooking up with the next reunion, but we never did. And I always regret that, because we got pretty tight.
Mm-hmm.
There was a few cases like that where, you know, we started snowballing. We'd pick up a new guy who knew somebody from here, and that guy knew somebody from there. So we'd be making calls, or, you know, I'd be making connections, mostly through vet centers and law enforcement agencies. I would work with Vietnam vets, and they would help me out. But there were a few cases where some of the guys had died after Vietnam.
Did you ever get to see any USO shows or anything, or entertainment, or Bob Hope, or anything like that? No.
No, I know that was happening there, but we were out in the bush most of the time.
Did you get an R&R at all?
I got an R&R, and I flew to Hawaii. From Hawaii, I flew civilian to California, Chicago, and Buffalo, because the first part of my tour was the worst, and I really didn't think I was going to make it out of it alive. So I wanted to see my family one more time.
No, that was just in 7 days you had?
I actually spent 5 nights home. I think it was 5 nights, because you spend 24 hours in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I really didn't think I'd ever see him again. So I flew home, and then had to fly right back. It was one of the toughest things I've ever done in my life, because this time I knew where I was going.
Were you aware of the anti-war movement and what was going on back in the States?
Yeah, we went into a cave in the Quaysons, and one of our rats went in there, a tunnel rat, and we found a room kind of opened up in a space like this, not quite as high, And they had IVs in there and medicine sent to the enemy from students from Berkeley, California. And I'll never forget that, because I thought that was a real eye-opener for me. I thought, you know, who's on our side here? You know, I've been hearing a lot about guys getting spit upon and at the airports and all kinds of stories like that. So, you know, you just thought, okay, the South Vietnamese you couldn't trust, the North Vietnamese you were fighting, the people back home aren't supporting us, so we only had each other.
When you returned to the States, did you come back in civilian clothes, or?
I did, yeah, I got off the airport in LA, civilian.
What did you do? Obviously, you were back home in 1970, you were still in until 72. What did you do between 70 and 72?
I was very fortunate. I came home on a 20-day leave. I really didn't want to have anything to do with the service anymore. Vietnam had turned me around completely. I had honestly considered making a career of the Marine Corps. I was going to become a drill instructor and all that, and I was just totally disillusioned with the Vietnam experience. So I was very fortunate having a rifleman MOS to get stationed at Cherry Point in North Carolina, which is an air wing base. Most of the grunts, like 99% of them, were getting sent to Lejeune. And had I gone there, I don't know if I'd have got out with an honorable discharge. I don't know if I could have handled 2.5 years more of that. But Cherry Point was a whole different story. It was just, you know, these were air wing, and they respected Vietnam vet infantrymen. So I got away with a lot more of
Now,
that.
what did you do there?
I was a training instructor. And that was the home of the Marine Corps Sport Parachute Team, and I always wanted to jump. Matter of fact, I signed up for recon in the Marine Corps in the end of my staging period, and they failed me on my eyesight because I wanted to join recon and jump. So when I got to Cherry Point and found that they had the Marine Corps Sport Parachute Team there, it's like, great, you know, I get to jump now. And that was all without the helmet and backpack and rifle. We had to do our 5 qualifying jumps with the rounds. We used to call them cheapos, the T-10s. And then from that point on, we used the squares, which were a lot more maneuverable. And we were jumping out of, you know, choppers and small craft and everything.
What rank were you at that point?
Sergeant. I left Vietnam. I went there a private and left a sergeant. I picked up a lot of rank there. But I stayed a sergeant. And I feel grateful for that because, again, had I gone to Lejeune, probably would have been a whole different story. But I was up for staff a couple times, but I just didn't want it. You know, I wanted out. I liked Cherry Point because I got to work out there, and they were a lot more lenient. I think they understood a lot more, but you know, that it would be better to just let him do his job, or where at the gym they probably would have gave you a hard time for doing some of the things you did. I was involved with the Vietnam Veterans Against the War for a while, and we went down to D.C., protested there, a couple other things, and I remember running into Jane Fonda when she was here at Love Canal. Now, everybody hates Jane Fonda, you know, all the vets. I haven't heard any veterans had a kind word for her, but I believe that it was people like her that ended that war. While I don't condone her going to Vietnam, I think that was when she crossed the line. Big mistake. and sighting through the AA gun with the NBA wearing the helmet and everything. But I think we needed more people like her that had that influence to take a stand against the war at that time, because everybody knew it wasn't working. You know, I think, I like to believe, you know, that we went there with, you know, with the right intentions. I think our country got involved with that with honorable intentions. And I like to believe that we're doing the same thing now in Iraq with honorable intentions, but, you know, I still don't know. I don't know what the hell we were doing in Vietnam. I don't know what we're doing in Iraq. That bothers me. You know, being a veteran, you know, I worked at the VA hospital. I see these guys. I see what happened to them in Vietnam and World War II, Korea, what's happening to them now. I see that every day, so it's like it never ended. And I work with these people. And I just, you know, I want to believe somewhere in my heart that, you know, that this was a just cause. But it's hard. It really is hard, you know. And at that point in time, I think it was really clear for a lot of people, you know, that we shouldn't have been there. We needed to get out. So when I met her, when I spent the day on tour with her and Tom Hayden, I snuck on the immediate bus, and I had just started shooting with 35 millimeter, and I had two cameras, one loaded with black and white, one color. I was working in the laundry, no, in the kitchen at the VA hospital at the time. So I had my white uniform on with the VA seal, and I just went down there to see her with a buddy of mine, and the bus was loading up when we got there. We had missed her, and so I said, I'm going to get in the line, because I had cameras like this, and, you know, I got in there, and they're asking, you know, what station you're with, and I just got there, and I said, Veterans Press or something like that, and they looked, but they let me in. So I told my buddy, I said, hurry up, tell them, you know, I'm not going to be in today, you know. So I wound up on the bus all day with her, and, you know, I heard these vets there, and they were protesting her, and, you know, and I shared the same sentiment with this one guy. I told him, I said, you know, the war would probably still be dragging on if it wasn't for people like this, you know. But again, you know, I'm totally against what she did in Vietnam.
Do you accept the apology that she, after she wrote her book, was it a year and a half ago, do you accept the apology that she issued?
Did it seem heartfelt? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. She's an actor, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Could have been. Who knows?
Do you read at all about Vietnam?
I try not to. I have a fairly extensive library, and a good portion of it is Vietnam material, but a lot of that is reference from my artwork. There was a period when I did quite a bit of Vietnam-related artwork. I got called upon in the mid-'80s to participate in this exhibit that they were having here in Buffalo, and it was all memorabilia from Vietnam, NVA flags and all this stuff, and they didn't have any artwork. So they contacted me and said, do you have anything in Vietnam? I said, no. I did a few things in Nam, and I gave them to the people. You know, that was always a bridge for me. I would use my art just as I use it today to work with a patient who's maybe nonverbal, and we get them to open up through artwork. Well, there were times you'd go in a bill, as you know, and the Vietnamese people wouldn't take too well to having a photograph taken. But boy, I'll grab a scrap of paper and sketch out a little portrait of the kid or the mama son, and that would tickle them. We just really got a kick out of that. So I didn't really have a body of work of Vietnam stuff, so I thought, okay, let me see what I could do. I had been burying this stuff in, you know, I've been involved in alcohol and everything else for a period of time, just trying to forget the whole thing. And I said, let me see what I can come up with here. And I kind of immersed myself in some readings and film and, you know, different things. And once I started creating this work, it was just pouring out of me. And I couldn't work on one at a time. I started having like 4 pieces going in the studio at the same time. And I was becoming more aggressive with it. There were pieces that I was standing about from here, you know, 10 feet away from, throwing things at the surface and finishing it off with the scrape across the rag, you know, with my nails, and especially the POW stuff. I felt very strongly about that because I just believed that there were certain powers that were sweeping the whole thing under the rug. There were probably quite a few of those guys we could have got back had we shown a little more interest in that, but we didn't. And I read a book by Larry O'Daniels called Missing in Action, Trail of Deceit. He was an Army intelligence officer, and the book was only about this big, but I could handle maybe a paragraph or a page at a time, and it would disturb me so much that I would have to come back to it another time. When I finally finished it, I just put these pieces together, and it just, again, they poured out of me, and they were very powerful. The Vietnam work, it was a double-edged sword. You know, you created this stuff, and it was gratifying to get it all out and just take it and throw it away. And you were doing it in such a way where the end result was before you. The only thing is, now you were faced with it. Mm-hmm. And that opened up a lot of, you know, cans of worms for me, because I think it was just happening so fast I didn't think about it that much. But when it was done, pieces like Suicide and Crucifixion and Deceit and all those pieces, they were just, they were tough to look at, you know, and I created them. And I see they're tough to look at when other people look at them. So, I don't know.
Where are those pieces now?
They're in the National Vietnam Veterans Art Museum in Chicago. There will be a show, The Things We Carried by Tim O'Brien, that book. There's a traveling show from that museum that will be in Dunkirk at the Adams Gallery, November 17th. They asked me to be the keynote speaker, and I've got a piece in that exhibit as well. But if you get a chance to get up there, it's a great collection of work.
Now, what did you do after you got out of the service? Did you go to art school or use the GI Bill at all?
Yes, I did. Things weren't working out. I tried to go back to my job at Morrison Steel. They were no longer there. They had gone bankrupt, moved, whatever. And Markel Electric had moved in there. And because I was a veteran, they hired me in there. And of course, I lost all my seniority. But that just didn't work out. I couldn't seem to hold down a job. So someone had told me about the GI Bill. I never saw myself going beyond high school. I don't even know how I graduated from high school. I partied so much, and the focus wasn't quite there. Mm-hmm. But I said, okay, I'll try it. And I started taking classes in Greek mythology and all that art classes, and figured, yeah, I'll take the check every month. But somewhere along the line, actually, I had taken some classes at East Carolina University when I got to Cherry Point. I took algebra and some English classes, some of the heavy classes that, the mandatory ones that you would need. And so that helped me. Those credits were transferred. And then when I was ready to get serious, I sat down with a counselor and he told me, you've got this, this, and that. All you need is this. And you could, home in on your BA. So I did that. I got my BA from UB in art, and I was very blessed to have run into Walter Perchonic. He was, I don't know if you knew him, he was a great man. He was a World War II veteran, involved in a lot of campaigns. The best artist I ever knew, and the best man. He took me under his wing. I think he saw I was going through a lot of problems, and maybe he saw a little talent there, and he spent time with me. He was the one that taught me that there was substance in abstract art. Up until that time, my idea of art was limited to the Renaissance painters, things that I could immediately relate to. And when I would come to a page or to a painting in the gallery that was abstract or anything other than, immediately identifiable, I would just walk past it or turn the page. And he took me up to Albright Knox, and he explained the Diebenkorns, the Rothkos, all the pieces like that. And to this day, I don't know what the hell he said to me, but whatever it was, it got through. Because somewhere along the line, he unlocked that door and taught me how to take what was going on in here and put it on canvas. And when I did that, it was a real relief, because I couldn't paint or draw like this anymore. All that tight stuff just wouldn't work. There was too much going on in here. And, I graduated in '78, so when I did get involved with this show, when they asked me to come up with some artwork, I had, absorbed that way of thinking, of the abstract expressionist approach, and that's what I enjoy using today.
Okay. Did you join any veterans organizations at all?
No, in the beginning, the veteran organizations weren't that receptive to having us join. And I had a problem with that. I still have some resentments about that. There were World War II vets, they were, you guys lost your war, this and that, so we had that to deal with, and I said, well, hell of it, Today, yeah, I belong to AMVETS and DAV and Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 77. I belong to a few veteran groups, I think largely because I'm involved with the VA hospital. I've been working there since '77.
Now, what do you do now?
I'm a creative arts therapist.
Okay. At the VA?
Yes.
Do you also do courtroom
Yes.
type art?
Yeah, they call me in whenever they don't allow the camera in.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get a call from either local or national, CNN, Fox.
Okay. How do you think your time in the service changed or had an effect on your life?
Well, I think it was mostly that year in Vietnam. When you say the service, all the other stuff, I just think of that year in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
That affected me immensely, tremendously. I can say today, because I'm healthy, because I'm still able to run and lift and work out, you know, and carry myself, you know, fairly well, work every day and things like that. I can say that that was an experience that helped me help other people. You know, that through that experience, I'm able to understand veterans that are going through combat-related problems today. I can understand people that are going through substance abuse problems. A lot of the problems that these guys have today, I've worked through, or I'm working through. So, in that respect, it did help me. I haven't slept well since Vietnam. I'm still up, you know, every couple hours. You know, I wake up like that, and there were anger issues for the longest time. You know, I'm still working on those. You know, I'm starting to find a little peace in my life here at 58 years old, finally. You know, but you know, there were a lot of dark tunnels to go through as a result of that year. But looking back at it now, yeah, I wouldn't trade it in.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you
you.
very much for the interview.